Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having Greek yogurt, frozen cherries, almond butter. All right, let's talk about the role of hamstrings and erectors in the back squat. Because this is, again, a complicated topic. You'll see people who are trying to bring up which muscles are worked, which muscles grow, or whatever from a squat. And people will often say things like, well, the hamstrings get recruited or used on a squat, therefore they're an important muscle. And the reality is they really aren't to the degree that people think they are. In other words, hamstrings contract heavily, but they don't grow as a result. Let me rephrase that. They grow a little tiny amount, just like biceps grow a little tiny amount from the bench press, but no one has ever built massive biceps purely from bench pressing without doing any rowing, curls, chin-ups, things like that, right, where they're a primary mover. In other words, hamstrings are a stabilizer, and we understand that better when you look at things like Lombard's paradox. We'll look that up for those who aren't familiar with it. They'll discuss that without really thinking through that the adductors are probably the most important primary mover, then glutes, then quads. Again, when you say that, people freak out and say that you're saying quads don't matter, which is, again, a ridiculous interpretation. It's like saying triceps don't matter on the bench press. Some people will argue that triceps are the most important muscle. Most people will argue that they aren't, and it's the same for quads. Quads matter. They matter a hair less than those other two muscles. Also grow a little bit less than those other two muscles from squats. And the only studies we have on that are full squats, Olympic type squats, or what a lot of people out there are calling a high bar squat. That's the data from those. So hamstrings, it turns out, though, don't actually grow very much. They grow a tiny, tiny amount. Nearly zero. You're not going to get big hamstrings from any style of squat. They matter a lot. It's the same thing with the low back. These are muscles that are important stabilizers, critical stabilizers. And they stabilize it in such a way that if your goal is to move as much weight as possible, if either one of these muscles are a weak link, it will affect it. Now, people would say, but if they're not moving the weight, then why does that matter? Because it's an exercise where we are standing on our feet. Okay, just like I tell people, your core and abs are not going to get worked enough from these movements to matter. They're not going to get big from squatting and strong from squatting. They aren't. Isometric contraction. You can be delusional and believe that they will, but it's not true. But they matter. They're having weak abs is going to impact your squat. But let's come over and think about what's going on with the erectors. And then we'll look at the hamstrings also. If our goal is to use the primary movers as efficiently as possible, particularly with something like the adductors, as I always say, big adductors equal to big squat. Okay. They're going to be a primary mover no matter what, but if you want to make the most use of them, you need certain things to happen. You need to be able to sit way back on a squat. You need to be able to sit back with a wide stance and use your hips and glutes to drive the weight out at the bottom, right? To drive your knees out so that we can maintain a more upright position. This gives us the most favorable bar path and leverages to move the most weight possible. Right? This is what it gives us. Well, these muscles impact our ability to do that. Number one, hamstrings. If you have weak hamstrings, you can't stabilize correctly to sit back. You're trying to push those hips way back and sit back and open up your hips. The eccentric requires hamstrings. Right? Not so much the concentric grip, not the way back up. The eccentric, to get that position, to where you can sit back, and what I teach people to do on a box squat. If I get a lifter who can't sit back on a box squat, I know they have weak hamstrings. Okay? If they can't get their knees at least perfectly upright on a box squat, they have a hamstring weakness. They don't have the stability in the hamstrings to sit back and push the hips back correctly. Therefore, we can't get into the best position for power squatting. So that person needs to build much bigger, much stronger hamstrings. And if they do, they will be able to get their hips back into a better position that will give us the best leverages in bar path. Okay, that's what it'll give us. So they need that hamstring work. So in that case, a person who can't do that correctly, doing a lot of hamstring work, will make them stronger at the squat. But because of the way it lets you handle the eccentric rep, to get into the best mechanical position to use the primary movers, the adductors, glutes, quads, effectively. What about the low back? We need to be able to sit back and lean forward. We need to be able to sit back and lean forward while keeping our chest up. Because if we sit back, what happens by default? We have to have forward lean of the torso to keep the bar mid-foot. We can't have the back cave. We've got to keep it up. When you go to sit back on a squat, when you come out of the hole, if a person coming out of the hole leans forward and loses the bar path, they have a weak low back. They have weak erectors. And that means they won't be able to handle the maximum weight with that forward lean. They'll crash out of the hole and they'll miss the lift. So when you go to come up, if this happens, you have a weak low back. Weak relative to the weight you have. You might be just fine with 405. Put 450 on, you have that problem. You might be fine with 450, you go to 500, that problem occurs and you miss the lift. Or you'll fail that way if someone's doing rep work for whatever reason. I don't prescribe that. So having a weak low back will impact you there, but the squat will not build the low back. So this is why we have all these accessory movements. Now, for people who just heard this, they're probably thinking, wait, so you're saying probably that good mornings and Romanian deadlifts will help make your squat stronger indirectly. Well, they'll do it directly too, because they build the hip extensors. But yes, as far as building these other muscles up, they will help. But this is the role that hamstrings and erectors play. And it is an important role. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.